Hello everybody, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the New News. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic night, that you've had a wonderful holiday if you live in the United States. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And I hope that you and your friends and your family are safe. And if not, I hope that you've had that safety and security in the very near future. I also hope that you, like myself, are getting the rest of the weekend off and are getting a nice long weekend for plenty of rest and recuperation from whatever endeavors you may be dealing with throughout your daily life. Unfortunately, for a lot of people throughout the world, a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And a lot of people are suffering under an immense crises that happen to them daily, holidays or not. They do not get any reprieve from what they are going through. And that is why here on the New News, 100% of everything we do is charity based. And we're able to do that through you guys and you guys alone. You guys allow us here at the New News to be able to be the news that gives back, meaning we can give back to all sorts of different organizations throughout the world to help people through the crises we talk about daily. We're never doing super chats on this channel. We're never doing any kind of merchandising. We're never doing any kind of monetization. 100% of everything we do will always be for charities, and at some point we would love to be able to put charities on every single stream we do and try and raise money through that endeavor as well. Thank you for allowing us to do that. If you check out the video description below, you're going to see a ton of different organizations down there. All of them go to these organizations which we have vetted to make sure that 80% or more of their donations go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people and not necessarily paying for those salaries and administration's costs. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, then give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's perfectly okay too. And one of the best things you can do is actually to help us in our outreach. The more people that come here and watch the news, not only do they become informed on what's happening in the world around them, but they are able to give back as well. And that improves the impact and increases the impact that this channel has to be a force for good throughout the world. So please, I hate to ask, but please give us that like and subscribe and share this amongst your friends and community and help us grow the project so that way we can do an immense amount of good in the future as we have continued to do so now. And so I thank you very much for the support you've already given us and even more so given to those wonderful organizations. Now, as you can see, there is a ton happening in the news. So we spent several additional hours than what we normally would putting this together tonight, going through many more of our sources that we normally get to. And as you can see, there's a lot that has happened over the last 48 hours throughout the world. And usually, that being said, it's not good, but a lot of it does have to do with conflicts and things. I have some personal input on some of these items, especially one of the news stories happening today, which I've actually been able to pull some of my own stuff for. And so with that, please feel free to ask questions. So I am watching the live chat as I do every single time we're going live. So if you're here live with us tonight, please feel free to make comments and ask questions, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Now, I can't answer everything, but I can do my best. And to give you a little bit of a background on myself, if you're new here, then here you go. So I served as a Marine in the United States Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was a corporal and an 0352 anti-tank missileman, and I served with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I did 2 tours to the Middle East, where my first tour I spent 4.5 months in the country of Syria between October of 2017 and March of 2020, and about a month and a half in Kuwait in transit. My second tour to the Middle East, I went to, I was the Javelin team leader for the crisis response company out of Kuwait, where I spent the majority of my time. But as a result of the protests that overran the Baghdad embassy complex on New Year's of 2020, I was one of the 100 Marines that responded, and I took my team there where I oversaw all anti-armor operations over the entire Baghdad embassy complex. From there, I also went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines who were getting ready to deploy to the country of Yemen as part of the Saudi coalition there. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I was a small unit leader. I am also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, and a CLS or Combat Lifesaver certified Marine, meaning I have received additional medical training on top of what is normally required for the Marine Corps. Outside of that, I also go and I am very interested in other things, geopolitics, history, human geography, and a great deal of many other things, paleontology, archaeology, that kind of stuff. And so I try to be very well-rounded, and I will try to answer questions outside of that scope. However, subject matter expert or not, I always implore that you as the viewer do your own research on any of these topics if you find interest in them. Just because it doesn't matter, there's no substitute for researching this stuff on your own and doing it thoroughly. And if you want to go, our website is in the description below. There are a ton of different we have our links for all of our maps down there, as well as any articles that myself or the others have written that you can go through, and you can actually click on any of these points and actually get these resources for yourself if you would at least like a starting point to that research. And so with that, we get ready to roll directly into the news here, and oh man, there's been a ton of stuff happening. Zach Jeffers is already getting into the comments here, and he says, I saw a poster of the solder guy, Muqtada al-Sadr. My uncle is commander in the army as a nurse. Yes, Muqtada al-Sadr. He is a he's a Shia cleric in Iraq. He's in Baghdad. He's in charge of the Mahdi army as well as the peace brigades. Peace brigades, they're a militarized force and a popular mobilization force, or PMF. Yeah, he's not, generally speaking, a very good guy. Well, we come down here and we start off, of course, in our special report of the night, which is out of Ukraine. And there's a ton of stuff happening in Ukraine, and we have some updates. Unfortunately, one of those updates comes from the casualty announcement from the missile attack, which hit Vyshhorod in the Kyiv Oblast, just to the north. And, quote, rocket attacks on Vyshhorod in the Kyiv region on November 23rd. 7 people were killed, 30 citizens were injured and hospitalized. Local residential buildings, a kindergarten, and a school were damaged. And that's coming from Andriy Nivatov, who is the Kyiv regional police chief. President Zelensky did end up going to the city himself, and he inspected the damage today, as well as visited one of those schools. You can see here, coming from President Zelensky's visit, some of the destruction, and it is pretty immense destruction that happened amongst those apartment complexes. But he did end up going to the school. That's coming from the office of the president of Ukraine, and we also have a video coming out from that today. Take a look.
Скоро перемога. Не чекай. Нам вже всі чекають.
So there you guys go. That's President Zelensky's visit there to Vyshhorod. We jump down into the city of Kyiv, where we see the Ukrainian people always being resilient, coming from Ilya Ponomarenko, who is a reporter with the Kyiv Independent. And we see that the widespread power outages due to Russian strikes, the hum of generators and music still fill the streets of Kyiv as the war continues. Ukrainians continue to physically embody and reiterate President Zelensky's statements to Russia: without power or without you. Without you. And so that is just a part of, it's over 2 minutes long, but that's just part of a short walk with Ilya Ponomarenko through the streets of Kyiv on this very night. Unfortunately, however, the Russian missile strikes not only knocked out the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure for the civilian population, but that very same infrastructure is also the external power sources for the nuclear power plants across Ukraine. In fact, the strikes on the 22nd and 23rd knocked out all the external power to every single one of the nuclear power plants across Ukraine, which all had to rely on the generators. They have diesel backup generators to ensure that the facility doesn't melt down. And that was the only thing that kept these facilities from melting down. And should have any of them failed, it would have been almost the exact same scenario as what occurred during the test that resulted in the Chernobyl nuclear incident back in the 1980s. And so while this power has been restored at this point, it's a very ominous sign to the world exactly what could happen if these acts of really terror are to be continued by the Russian Federation. This is why it is not just a Ukraine problem when it comes especially to the atomic energy sector. This is a global problem. This stuff is affecting not just the civilians in their homes, but also the entire planet, as some of the largest nuclear power plants in Europe are located inside of Ukraine, and there are multiple of them. This is something that the International Atomic Energy Agency actually commented on and did end up giving us reports about. So coming from the 24th, about 12 p.m. Eastern Time, external power has been restored to support the nuclear power plant a day after losing access to off-site electricity, and the latest incident highlighting continued threats to nuclear safety and security during the armed conflict. They went up to once again update this today about 9:30 in the morning, saying that Ukraine's 4 operational nuclear power plants all have access to Ukraine's national grid again, following complete loss of off-site power this week. Separately, IAEA completed a week-long nuclear safety and security expert mission to Chernobyl and its exclusion zone. This was followed up by an actual statement by the the Director General, I should say, of the International Atomic Energy Administration or Agency, Rafael Grossi. So this is his statements today. They do come from his official Twitter account, but it was much easier than giving you 40-second chunks to just find a video here on Reddit that had the whole thing. So here, take a look.
The safety and security of all of Ukraine's nuclear facilities is of central and vital concern to the IAEA. We have been actively engaged with Ukraine since the start of this tragic conflict to ensure that these facilities are protected. We have been particularly working on the safety and security of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and where we have had IAEA experts on site since the beginning of September, providing assistance and support. And we are making progress in establishing a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the Zaporizhzhia site. But while the world has been focused on the dangerous situation at Zaporizhzhia, Europe's largest nuclear power plant, we must not forget the country's other nuclear facilities. Yesterday, for the first time ever, all of Ukraine's 4 operational nuclear power plants, Zaporizhzhia, Rivne, South Ukraine, and Khmelnytsky, lost external power and were disconnected from the grid. They were all forced to rely on emergency diesel generators for the electricity they need to ensure their continued safety and security. This unprecedented situation would have been unimaginable just months ago. It is deeply worrying. At the start of a war, I outlined the 7 indispensable pillars for safety and security, which include that physical integrity must be maintained and there must be secure off-site power. I appeal today that these pillars must be respected to ensure that all Ukraine's nuclear power plants are not affected in this way again.
And there you go, Director Rafael Grossi regarding the situation at the nuclear power plants there. Luckily, power was restored to them all. However, once again, that is something that impacts most of Europe if something were to go wrong. It impacts essentially the entire continent of Europe, and it would be absolutely disastrous and have global implications if such a disaster of that magnitude, because there is a possibility, regardless of safety features, regardless of redundancies, there is always the possibility, however minute, that there could be catastrophic destruction of all of those facilities. There could be meltdowns. If the diesel generators, much like Chernobyl, if the diesel generators end up failing, or if they run out of fuel because they cannot be supplied, then there is a possibility that the destruction, that they could go into a meltdown scenario. And that, if just one of those having that to occur would be terrible. We had the potential for 4. And that is only going to increase as Russia continues the strikes on civilian infrastructure. Now, we call it civilian infrastructure, and I've seen a lot of debate before, and I've covered this before and about pretty much most of the last recent streams, as to why is it a war crime to hit infrastructure. A lot of comparisons are made to when the United States did the shock and awe campaign in 2003 in Iraq, or during the 1991 shock and awe campaign, or during the bombing in parts of former Yugoslavia, specifically Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the reason being is that there's distinction created under Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, that differentiates an infrastructural target between a civilian infrastructural target. And the difference being is that the primary usage of the infrastructure must be for military purposes to consider it a military target. Therefore, its destruction should not have significant ramifications for civilian population or critical infrastructures thereof. For instance, you can't bomb food depots or whatever, unless those are food, that is where the food preparation for military forces is being conducted at, as one of the given examples. And likewise, energy infrastructure outside of military bases is fair game, but energy infrastructure for cities is not, because the primary usage is to support the civilian population of those cities. And likewise, causing nuclear catastrophes, such as the possibility of what could have happened not but a couple days ago, is obviously a war crime, because that has very much wide-scale implications. It would be disastrous for the civilian populations thereof. However, in a little bit lighter news here, 50 more Ukrainians did end up returning home. Quote, today we managed to release 50 Ukrainian soldiers from captivity. Importantly, 19 Mariupol defenders are free again. 12 of them were evacuated from Azovstal. 15 prisoners were captured at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And 7 at the Snake Island also came home. And that's coming from Andriy Yermak, the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, from his official Twitter.
Yeah. Героям слава! Україні!
Also coming from the Security Services of Ukraine. Take a look.
Всіх вітаю, хлопці. Привіт. Привіт. Нашому президенту дякую, виконаю його завдання. Слава Україні! Героям слава! Вітаю.
So a little bit lighter news there, a little bit uplifting there. Always good to see guys come home. However, we do have a child casualty update. And child casualty update is this. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 440 Ukrainian children have died, 849 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region, end quote. And that is coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. We also see that at this point, as a result of the infrastructure attacks that we have seen over the last few weeks, since October 10th, at least 77 Ukrainian civilians have been killed and another 272 injured due to the missile strikes by Russian troops on energy facilities in Ukraine. That's coming from Tolker Turk, who is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And it is a complete blackout in many places. Quote, due to yesterday's massive Russian missile attack on Ukraine, there's no electricity supply in more than 1,000 settlements in Kyiv region. And that is coming from Andrei Kievitov, who is the Kiev regional police chief. 989 points of invincibility have been deployed across Ukraine, according to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. These provide a place for civilians to charge their phones, get internet signal, first aid, food, clean water, and other basic amenities. 980 of these things have been deployed, 117 deployed to the Donetsk region alone, and in 989, these points are basically, think of them self-contained, individual, smaller humanitarian shelters. These are mostly one of those tent setups you would see used for military purposes that have electricity and heating, but these things are provided to the Ukrainian civilians at different locations all throughout the country that they can get basic amenities still that are necessary. You can see one of these things here. The inside, very simple in its design, but it is effective. But these are the points of invincibility. So, great to see that is being provided, and hopefully that will bring a lot of good, will have a great outcome for a lot of these people. Keep in mind, many parts of Ukraine at this point, due to the strikes on infrastructure, not only are they out of electricity, but that electricity, therefore, is also needed for things such as sanitation systems, for basic water supplies, gas supplies. And so striking this infrastructure has caused immense catastrophic results, because it affects everything that they do. You need electricity to run all of these grids. You need electricity for the people themselves, but also to run the other basic services that they require. And so a lot of these people, they don't have gas, which means they don't have heating. They don't have a way to cook. And you're talking about they don't have running water. They don't have sanitation as a result, because running water is required for sanitation systems. And so and we see these ramifications across the entire country of Ukraine. It's not just in the areas of the front line now. This is stuff that is affecting everywhere across the country. However, electricity has been restored to a degree. As of 11 a.m. this morning, local time, electricity producers over at Energo said that more than 70% of the country's consumption needs priority was given to critical infrastructure facilities in all regions: boiler houses, gas distribution centers, water supply, sewage treatment facilities, public electric transport, which is still currently operating in some regions. And that it was the priority, but they did end up releasing that on their official Facebook. And they're also, while they're doing this, they said that they're also giving attention to green sectors as well, using green energy to provide, instead of trying to go backwards in time to things such as coal fire and everything else. Right now they're trying to, as they're having to repair this, trying to improve it overall by using greener energies in order to bring back that electrical grid, such as hydroelectric or thermal power, thermoelectric power and stuff like that. So that's good. We're not seeing them kind of revert back. But even though these people don't have electricity, it doesn't matter. No gas, that's not a problem either. Just grab yourself some candles. And Anton Jeroshenko says candle-made dinner looks delicious and it's ready in 8 minutes. Tried and true tactic. And yes, the eggs are the way to go. Eggs are already very fast cooking. A couple of funny notes. You can do immense amounts of things when you have nothing. In fact, a little bit of tip if you do find yourself on the front lines. If you get yourself a 50 cal ammo can, works best. But get yourself a 50 cal ammo can, and if you want to, make sure you wash it out really well, but if you want to, you can cook a soup in it. Use a hot water kettle, like an electrical hot water kettle or something like that, and then pour it over poached eggs. And you can pour it over eggs, or you can create a soup with it. We made pho noodles one time, which is Vietnamese. And also, we then took that same ammo can a couple days later, and we punched some holes in the bottom to allow for some air ventilation. And then we took aluminum foil, and we wrapped the can lid. We knocked off the can lid, and then wrapped it in aluminum foil. And then we made ourselves a bunch of scrambled eggs on it. It's extremely effective. We lit a fire inside of the can. It's self-contained, and it lasts really well. And so that you can do a whole lot more than what you think you can. Some of these modern amenities aren't necessarily required, but they are definitely nice to have and make life a lot easier. So, but yes, always good to see the resilience coming out of the Ukrainians, and they are getting ingenuitive, which is awesome to see. People are very, very creative, and there's always a way to overcome. Richard W. says the only thing that keeps the world from bombing Putin is Russian nukes. That's pretty much it. That's about the only reason that the world has not just probably leveled Russia and toppled its government just outright. Because a conventional war would obviously escalate into a nuclear one, I think, is the concern. And so unless you can find a way to secure the nuclear weapons before they are able to launch, there is no real way for you to launch an actual military operation against Russia. But if it was to happen, if you were able to find that way, Russia probably wouldn't exist anymore. Russia would probably have an interim government and be in the process of being split into multiple different nations at this point, probably based along their federation lines. Come down here and into Poltava, where it's a city in darkness. Quote, as of November 24th, there's no electricity supply throughout the Poltava region, including its administrative center of Poltava, according to Dmitry Lunin, who is the head of the Poltava Regional Military Administration. Jumping over here into Kupiansk, where shelling does continue. Despite its liberation months ago, Kupiansk is still under near daily shelling from Russian forces. The Ukrainian National Police are documenting the incidents as they continue to collect evidence for the International Criminal Court and possibly a special tribunal here in the coming future. We actually get this from the National Police of Ukraine via their official Twitter. We can see some of the destruction that was ongoing here at the time. That brings us into the Donbass, where we see the primary focus of the war, where we see the heaviest fighting, and that's where the majority of the news is ongoing here. And we come down here, and this is at a Ukrainian position here in the just on the border of the Luhansk and Donetsk region. So what's really cool, something that I was actually very proud of. Now we have always stated that our map is not an actual representation of the situation ongoing on the ground. But with that being said, 2 of our locations that we have actually geolocated tonight to their specific points in the world we found out that their points were actually, we only were off by a margin of error of about 2 miles. So I actually mapped it, and I figured out that our points, based off of geolocation versus where the front lines were, we are off by only 2 miles, which is not a bad margin of error, considering we don't have anybody on the ground in Ukraine specifically. and do not always have the best information. So it means that we are keeping very accurate with what the depiction is here on the ground with our information. So that was very reassuring as a side note. But what's happening here is that Russian forces are using incendiary weapons against a Ukrainian position here. This is near Spirne, which is in the Donetsk Oblast. These munitions, there's been a lot of talk. Was it white phosphorus? Was it thermite? Was it this? Was it that? Well, we have some very good confidence in our answers now that some research has been done, and we can very much be able to tell you at this point the types of incendiary munitions that Russia has been using are neither thermite nor white phosphorus. In fact, the incendiary compounds that they use are actually not very specified by any sources that I could find. It's probably a mixture of both. But what they but the munitions themselves are called the 9M22S. They're 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets, and they fire a bunch of different little projectiles, essentially. But there are a bunch of incendiary segments built inside of the rockets. They airburst over the target in order to maximize their effective radius, and then they rain down on whatever their target is. They're fired from the BM-21 Grad, which stands for hail in Russian. And that is what is being used against most of these locations, and it gives its signature pattern as a weapon system. Now, using them against personnel alone actually violates international humanitarian law, and it violates specifically rule number 85. We'll take a look at the incident, and I'll bring that up here in just a moment. So this is incendiary weapons usage against Ukrainian forces near Spirne, in the Donetsk Oblast. Take a look. So once again, these are the 9S22Ms, and you're going to see they're going to airburst over these targets, and they fire these they're octagonal pellets that are filled with incendiary munitions, and they then drop over these locations. You can see them being hit with artillery here, and here they come. These are the 9S22Ms. You can see they airburst over their target, and they spew out in these columns. These are Hello? Are we good now? Okay, we're back. Sweet. All right, cool. I saw that someone had dropped. I saw that the stream had dropped. I apologize for that. So now, what I was going out and saying is that I hope that you guys were able to catch most of that. So we see. I'll go back here. So we see that they hit this with artillery first. It wants to be dumb now. And you see where these things pop down and they shoot out over an area. And what this does is it creates an area of effect, but luckily what ends up happening here is the fact that most of those munitions ended up hitting pretty much muddy ground and it wasn't able to catch anything on fire. Now, it breaks international customary humanitarian law number Rule 85, which is provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross's database. And it says, quote, the anti-personnel use of incendiary weapons is prohibited unless it is not feasible to use a less harmful weapon to render a person hors de combat, meaning no longer a combatant. And they give plenty of examples and citations for this for both international armed conflicts and non-international armed conflicts. So that is considered a war crime. It breaks international humanitarian law to do this in order to render someone hors de combat. Once again, something that would be less feasible would be using artillery, for instance, which does not have any real regulations onto it, and it's used as warfare as long as it's used in the correct manner, meaning it's not used indiscriminately against civilian targets, which break the Geneva Conventions. Richard W. asks, can Russian military officers be held individually accountable for war crimes? Yes. Whoever perpetrates a war crime is to be individually held accountable. This is something that we can see happen. If you look at post-war years following World War II, you can see individual accountabilities for different officers within their military chains of commands. In fact, it is under the Geneva Conventions, being ordered to do something does not mean you can do it. It doesn't matter if you're just following orders. There's plenty of precedents for that, and that's something that we're actually taught when we go into the military is you are required to follow only lawful orders. If you are provided an unlawful order, such as to massacre civilians or break the Geneva Convention or customs and laws of the nation, then you are therefore allowed not to follow orders, and you're allowed to disobey them because it is considered unlawful. So these military officers, everything from those intended to planning this, they're held accountable for the planning of this under the Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions. They are held accountable for carrying out the orders and giving the orders of the strikes based off of Rule number 85 of Customary International Humanitarian Law. And then under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and under other conventions which Russia and Ukraine are party to, as well as the international community at large, you are held accountable for being the individual. It's not just those officers, but the individuals who fired that weapon system who would be held accountable for war crimes. So that is how that is handled. Margaret Go, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names, by the way. It says it's not likely Russian soldiers will be charged. That is correct. It is almost impossible, unfortunately, because of the size and scope of this. It's almost impossible to be able to tell who is actually doing what, and the accountability can get very murky, unfortunately. Keep in mind, this is the largest conflict since World War II, and since the way that we end up taking care of war crimes has changed. These systems were not put in place until after the Second World War. So this is really the biggest test of these systems and of these laws and accountability factors that we've ever had to deal with. Goff, like it. Thank you. Sorry, I apologize. We see that fighting does continue near Soledar. Soledar is just to the north of Bakhmut. Bakhmut has been in serious fighting, and this whole region has been in very serious fighting, very bitter and brutal fighting, and it's only gotten worse since the beginning of the winter has really set in. The heavy fighting is mostly between Ukrainian forces and the Russian Wagner group located here, who are presenting the largest amount of troops into the region, as well as many of the local militias that were stood up and conscripted by Russian forces from Ukrainians there in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Clear skies have allowed Ukrainian forces to once again start to call in air support, which we've seen very minimal of, as the current environment around this area has been very poor with visibility for aircraft. But we are seeing close air support once again, and these are being called in to provide rocket runs on Russian positions. Those guys are always happy to see air support, and I don't blame them. Margaret Goff says, will they go to Russia to charge them? So that's the problem. So therein lies the problem. Is the fact is how do you keep someone accountable? And that's really the question that we're facing right now. We can see in Western countries where accountability, even though it could be a little muddy sometimes in how it's done, and not everyone agrees, but you still see where the system is in place for war crimes perpetrated especially over the last 30 years with the war on terror. The Dutch actually just stated that the Dutch had committed some extensive amounts of war crimes in Afghanistan, and that the individuals were going to prison and were being prosecuted for that, and that there was confirmation that that had occurred. Even though the invasions are long over, I mean, the accountability is still taking place. We also see that with Haditha, with the massacres of at the city of Haditha near the Haditha Dam in Iraq, where U.S. forces, specifically a squad of Marines, ended up massacring about 20 people inside of Haditha. I believe it was 24 in total, and they were held accountable. They were actually brought out of country. They were put under court-martials that lasted for years, upwards of 5 years, 5 to 10 years after the incident, they were still going through court-martials and evidence of that situation. Unfortunately, however, a lot of them were brought up on lesser charges or what have you. But while of course the saying I have investigated myself and found no wrongdoing still rings true in many ways, unfortunately that is the world we live in. But the reality is that at least there is an effort to do the right thing in many cases, and that at least the process takes place. But that does happen. Bookham 40 says the BMP series, 3 crew plus dismounts, is the Bradley the same? Well, we bring out the Book of Knowledge to give you the defined answer on that. So the Book of Knowledge, for those that don't know, so I maintain, if you look at that entire lower section of that bookshelf, that is nothing but military manuals. I was fortunate enough to maintain and get a lot of manuals. I keep several of my most highly used ones next to me, the ones I stay sharp on. Such as I have my Javelin manual, I have my tow missile manual, or for the Saber system, which that's a tow missile right there for those who don't know, or it's a tow missile tube rather. And I maintain this one because it's really easy to be able to bring up, and it's a very quick reference, and it's something that I can actually show you guys. So this is the actual manual I received when I went through my initial training to become a 0352 anti-tank missileman. It's one of my infantry manuals for that specific job, and it has a lot of armor identification, which is really important if you're going through and trying to be very precise on what is going on, but I can also answer questions like that with it. So we switch to, I want to say it's Armor Block 2, which gives me infantry fighting vehicles and armor personnel carriers. And let's see here, we have, that's the BMD series. Give me the BMP. I don't care about that. Can I please get a BMP? Can I please get a BMP? Por favor. Yes. Okay. So the one that one specifically is a BMP2, and you can tell this because a BMP2 has the autocannon on the front, but it doesn't have a larger gun and then a smaller gun mounted next to it. They technically have 2 main guns on a BMP2. They're dual mounted. Or on a BMP3 and a BMP4, which this one only goes up to a BMP3. But these specifically, so the BMP2, let's see, capable of 3 crew and 7 fully equipped infantrymen in the back. Now we find the M2 M3 Bradley, which is 3 crew and 7 fully equipped infantry in the back. However, the Bradley has a higher profile, obviously, and it does actually have thicker armor. So the BMP series, so both of them technically they carry only between 12 and 25 millimeters of armor. That's kind of the designation for an infantry fighting vehicle, which is the designation for both of those. Even though they carry troops, they're technically an infantry fighting vehicle. They provide infantry gunfire support, and they're not just battlefield taxis. But the Bradley has a higher profile, but that's because it was initially built as an armored personnel carrier. There's a whole thing on this. I think it's called Pentagon Wars. If you guys have ever seen that movie, it's actually it's hilarious comedy. But I highly recommend you watch it because there's actually a lot of truth to it. And so the BMP is it has thinner armor, the type, and it also has a different type of armor. It has a rolled homogeneous steel, which means it uses only one type of steel in its construction, which is considered, that's the old way of building these vehicles. For instance, the M113 or the M113, which is the APC that we have given Ukraine, but that was also used very heavily in Vietnam and also in Desert Storm. You see that it has a rolled homogeneous steel. The same thing with the M48 Patton that we saw, and then the M48 Bulldog, and then the M60 Patton tanks. Those had rolled homogeneous steel. And then the Abrams comes out and it has a composite mixture, and the newer ones have a different composite mixture. It's steel, ceramic, and a bunch of other stuff in there. I don't know the exact makeup. Nobody does. Well, there are people that do, but very few, because that's way above my clearance level. but that is the way that you're supposed to design tanks now. It's lighter, but it's stronger than steel, and rolled homogeneous steel has a lot lower fail. It has a lot lower points of failure than that armor composite does. So they're old fashioned is what it breaks down to. The M3 Bradley, the M2A M3 Bradleys, they're gonna have that rolled. They're gonna have not just have rolled homogeneous steel, but they're gonna have a composite mixture. And they're also going to have a different slope angle, which is going to give a higher degree of protection because it increases the thickness of the armor without increasing the thickness of the armor you have to add. It increases the deflection angle. But also the M3 or the M2 M3 Bradleys also have box-mounted anti-tank guided missiles. They have tow missiles actually that are wired to the side of it, and they also have a huge optic suite. So it's also probably a lot more comfortable, which is fine. But I mean, not to say that they're comfortable because no military vehicle is. If you've ever tried getting in a Humvee, you would understand what I mean. But yes, that is the, yeah. So they do technically, by doctrine, carry the same amount of troops and crew. But that doesn't necessarily mean the reality there. I hope that answers your question, Bookham 40. Coming down into Bakhmut, I saw a very large. There was a segment of 8 photographs that came out today, and you saw one that is being used as the thumbnail for the video. And I think it's very important to see these photos. I've talked quite extensively about how terrible the situation is in the Bakhmut area. This is an area where victory is measured by inches, not yards, not meters, not kilometers, not miles. It is measured in mere centimeters and inches. That is the reality of the fighting in Bakhmut. And the Rasputitsa mud has set in. The winter has set in. The conditions are terrible. It's static defensive lines, and it is the most reminiscent of World War I have ever seen on a battlefield to date. And the situation is ungodly terrible. And these photos speak for themselves as to the horrors of what is happening in this city. More than I think you could write 1,000,000 books on what has happened in Bakhmut, and it would not describe the essence of these photos. So these come from Getty Images, and these are very, very powerful. Take a look. So these are guys, they are wounded technically, but they are coming off of the front lines here. They're coming out of the trenches. If these aren't haunting photographs, I don't know what you could possibly consider to be. So this appears to be actually a medic. And you can tell one of the reasons why I think that is because he's carrying raptor shears. And you usually only medics will carry the raptor shears. I mean, I did at one point, but usually medics are the ones carrying those raptor shears. Those are very, very strong, and they can cut through just about anything. Want to watch them cut a penny in half or a coin in half or anything else, so you get yourself some raptor shears. They're worth the money. And you see just how rough this guy is. I mean, he's seen it. That's another very good photo, I think, of this whole endeavor. I think this captures. I mean, that is the look. That is the look of the 1,000-yard stare. That is the shell shock. That is the post-traumatic stress. That is the anxiety. That is the numbness to what is happening around you. That is the look on this man's face. You know, there's only one way you get that stare. And that is to go through something horrifically traumatic. This is reminiscent of World War I. The trenches are filled in a slop of water and mud and filth and blood. It is muddy. It is wet. It is cold. It is miserable. It is constant artillery bombardment going both ways. Hundreds of thousands of rounds of artillery shells, rockets and towed tube artillery, mortars. And it is wave attacks between one trench line and another. The Russians have been throwing waves of conscripts at the Ukrainian defensive lines in attacks that resemble attacks across no man's land in World War I. The Battle of the Somme, of Passchendaele, of Verdun, of the Bocage. These are more reminiscent of what is happening in Ukraine right now than any war fought since. That is the reality of Bakhmut. That is the reality of this area right here. This is some of the most brutal, bitter, slow, meat-grinding fighting. The most terrific war of attrition that one could possibly imagine. It is a hell beyond any comprehension. And that is to say, after we've already seen what happened in Mariupol. Mariupol was a massacre of people. This is a meat grinder. In Kramatorsk, we see that one person was injured in major shelling that occurred in the city of Kramatorsk. Amid Russian shelling, which attacked the de facto administrative head of the Ukrainian-controlled Donetsk Oblast. Reportedly, the shelling was directed at industrial areas of the city. However, several rounds fell short and struck residential areas as well. We can see some of the footage from some of these strikes coming out today. I apologize that most of these don't have any sound. But this appears to be coming from security footage. We can see some of the damage from afar. And coming from Pavel Kolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, we can see the photos of some of the destruction here after the fact. Colossal amounts of damage to these buildings. You can see the residential block here. Windows obviously shattered and rubble laying strewn across the ground. And the massive shell crater which created it. He continues to urge everyone in the region to please evacuate if you have not already. This is coming from this very small village. This is a very small village, but a village nonetheless, and its name is Nevelsky. It's just over by the city of Donetsk, and just near Pisky, where we've seen immense amount of fighting and immense amount of destruction on the part of Russian forces within the region. In fact, Google, if you guys haven't noticed, Google has actually done some updates to its map, for those that didn't notice. And you can see the level of destruction in some areas now of what has happened here as a result of the war. Now, we originally had this damage and destruction over here at the international airport, but that has now been expanded. If you go over here and you look at Pisky, you can see half of the village pretty much before the war, and you can see what it's like now. Mariupol, unfortunately, hasn't been updated. But over here in Nevelsky, incendiary weapons usage once again on Nevelsky. The Russian forces employed the 9S-22M incendiary Katyusha rockets against the village of Nevelsky, Donetsk Oblast, as they continued their assault against the Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian-held towns. The usage of munitions against military personnel once again violates rule number 85 of the international humanitarian law. The usage against a village, city, or civilian population violates both Protocol 3 of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, adopted in 1983, and the additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, adopted in 1977. You can take a look and see this. Once again, you can see this being at night gives you a better idea as to the usage of the destruction of that. You can see as it hits these fields, it spreads these little incendiary shells, which are kept inside. They're little octagonal things, and they're held inside of the rocket itself. And when it air bursts, it shoots out all of these little pellets of incendiary substances, and it spreads it over a wide area, so it covers as much area as possible with these incendiary munitions that burn at thousands of degrees, and it covers them, and it ignites everything it comes into contact with. If it is ignitable, it lights it on fire. Whether you're talking about plants or vegetation or homes or people, it lights it on fire. It's some of the most horrific ways of killing somebody you can possibly imagine. In fact, the convention on certain conventional weapons doesn't even do justice, as even the U.S., which was using napalm, it was using napalm and was using flamethrowers, even some incendiary substances like white phosphorus. Well, the United States had stopped quite some time before of even employing things like white phosphorus grenades, because that was a thing, using white phosphorus hand grenades against military personnel long before these conventions even took place. Once again, customary rule number 85 of international humanitarian law: the anti-personnel use of incendiary weapons is prohibited unless it's not feasible to use a less harmful weapon to render a person horrors to combat. We continue here. This is the 1949 Geneva Conventions, additional Protocol 1. And once again, this is what covers their usage, or their indiscriminate usage of munitions, of artillery and other fires against civilian populations and civilian infrastructure, including homes. That is what falls under the Protocol 1. Protocol 3 on certain conventional weapons. This coming from the United Nations database here. This is the Protocol on Prohibitions of Restrictions of the Use of Incendiary Weapons, or Protocol 3 of the additional protocols to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. And they state here, quote, under Article 2, it is prohibited in all circumstances to make a civilian population as such, individual civilians or civilian objects, the object of attack by incendiary weapons. Part 2, it is prohibited in all circumstances to make any military objective located within a concentration of civilians the object of attack by air-delivered incendiary weapons. It is further prohibited to make any military objective located within a concentration of civilians the object of attack by means of incendiary weapons other than air-delivered incendiary weapons, except when such military objective is clearly separated from the concentration of civilians and all feasible precautions are taken with a view to limiting the incendiary defects to the military objective and to avoiding in any event to minimizing the incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. 4. It is prohibited to make forests or other kinds of plant cover the object of attack by incendiary weapons except when such natural elements are used to cover, conceal, or camouflage combatants or other military objectives or themselves military objectives. Once again, what does this mean? It means that you can't use it against a town. You can't use aircraft to drop napalm against troops in the town. You can't use anything else against the town unless you are using it in a discriminatory fashion, aka not airbursting it over the town. It doesn't take a legal expert to understand what this means. These are written in a way, these are not written in legal speak. If you read the Geneva Conventions, they're not written in legal speak. The definitions of genocide and crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing are not written in legal speak. They are not written in a way that should confuse anyone who graduated from a school or didn't even have to graduate from the school. Just, make it to a moderate degree in school. You don't have to be crazy. You don't have to be well-educated, super well-educated to read this. You just have to be literate in some fashion to understand what this means. You just have to be literate. And it's written these ways for a reason. Because it does be able to tell when something is horrifically wrong. Has Russia signed the Geneva Convention? I am wonderfully happy that you have asked. So let's see here. What international treaties is Russia a party to? Let's see here. Let's find a source. UN tracker. Let's see. United Nations Treaty, League of Nations Treaties. Can I please get I'm trying to find different treaties and who is states party. Let's see. I don't think they did. No, they signed it. They are... UN Treaty Tracker. Sorry, I'm trying to find this. I found it one time, and I wish I was able to actually tell you. Can I please get this? Oh, here we go. This is it. All right. All right. So here are. So this is the tracker. This is the United Nations Human Rights Council and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I'm sorry for the wait here, folks. So this is very important. So this is the. This tells you all of the treaties that that actually are party to Russia. And so Russia, out of 18 international human rights treaties, is party to 11 of them. And so if we actually take a look here, so they are treated to the International Convention to the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, 1753. They signed it in 1966, ratified it in 1969. International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, 1753. Signature 1968, ratified 1973. Optional Protocol to the International Covenant of Civil Rights, 1753. They didn't sign it, but they ratified it in 1991. Once again, aiming to abolish the death penalty. They are not party to that. International Covenant on Economical, Social, and Cultural Rights, signed 1968, ratified 1973. Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Remember, they're using sexual and gender-based violence as a weapon of war. Signed 1980, ratified 1981. Additional optional protocol, signed 2001, ascended 2004. Against torture and other cruel and Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, signed 1985, ratified 1987. Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1990, ratified same year. Optional Protocol, signed 2001, ratified 2008. Protocol of the Convention on the Rights of Child for the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography, signed 2012, ratified 2013. Man, that took a long time. Convention on the Rights of All Persons with Disabilities, signed 2008, ascended 2012. Which ones are you not against? Okay, so there's one optional protocol that they're not part of for the treatment and cruel and inhumane degrading treatment. Status of ratification, interactive task board. Okay, so let's see here. Sign or not. Yeah, sign or not, they don't keep their promises. That is very true. Parties to the Geneva Conventions. We'll see here if I can get more, because it should be listed in the IHL. Actually, we can go here. States party to the Geneva Convention. Let's see here. Can I find it, please? Where does the Geneva Convention apply? Coming from the International Committee of the Red Cross database. Give me Russia. Russian Federation. So they signed it. So it's what? Signed and ratified and declared. So Russia signed the Geneva Conventions on December 12th, 1949, ratifying it on October the 5th, 1954. Once again, giving that declaration later. There you go. They are, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, they are considered a party to the Geneva Conventions, according to their database. So I hope that answers your question. I apologize for taking so long to do that, but I think it's important to be able to actually bring that through. Pure Loyalist says Russia withdrew. I don't believe that they did. Did Russia withdraw from the Geneva Conventions? He only withdrew from Protocol 1 at the Geneva Conventions. Are civilian mercenary groups like Wagner Group prosecuted under criminal law? Yes. Civilian mercenary groups are... Well, that sucks because he didn't... Yeah, right. He didn't sign them. He didn't need to. But anyway, are civilian mercenary groups like Wagner Group prosecuted under criminal laws? Yes. So if you are working as a mercenary, meaning you're going to do it for profit... There's a lot of things that technically the Russian Wagner Group could not be considered mercenaries right now. They would be considered active combatants in the war based off of their nationality, as their party is one of the warring parties. So therefore, they're technically covered by international law as being considered military contractors, the same way that the United States has contractors in other countries, but are not considered mercenaries, like, I don't know, VICTORIES, Academy, or Triple Canopy, or whoever else you want. So that is the like how that works. So they are actually considered covered under that. Charlton Brooks has just read that Putin revoked it in 2019. Yes, if you go on to read that Reuters article, it will specify additional Protocol 1. It doesn't mean he didn't still break it. As we continue down here, we're actually going to drop down here to Mariupol, work our way back up into the Donbass, and there was a loud explosion that was heard near one of the administration's buildings there on Gromova Street here in Mariupol. So far, it's reported that one was dead, according to local authorities, but their information is very limited right now. Reportedly, a car ended up exploding. Wouldn't be surprised. We have seen possible partisan activity coming out of Mariupol already, so it could be one of them. Further on, we're seeing heartbreaking photos from the only operational hospital in the city of Mariupol, which shows the very terrible conditions inside. We can see from these photos the conditions that are being found from inside the hospital. This is hospital number 2 in Mariupol. It's the only working hospital there. And this image is the most distraught one for me. You can't see much, but you can see this person's legs, and you can see the condition that they're in. That's a very telltale sign of malnutrition and starvation. And once it gets to that point, it is very difficult to say. This looks like the legs of someone who survived the Holocaust. once again to have survived the Battle of Mariupol. I think it's a worse fate than death. March back up here into the north, where mutiny appears to be in the air. More Russian troops, this time from the country of Ukraine, have recorded themselves talking about the terrible conditions. Reportedly, after retreating from the front lines, these troops are being open about the terrible conditions of their armed forces, once again stating that they were left to die on the front lines with minimal equipment and terrible leadership. They request to go home.
Был обстрел. Обстрел велся нами, нашими же людьми по нам велся обстрел. Нас привезли в Макеевку в 3 часа ночи. Началась выгрузка с КАМАЗов. С КАМАЗов была выгрузка в 3 часа ночи, нас повели. Объявился, был такой точка, представился комбатом. Комбат сказал, так называемый точка, передал нам другим лицам. Был один из них лютый, а второй, пацаны, как звали?
Депутат.
Депутат, да, у него прозвище было депутат.
Позывной.
Now, obviously, there's not any subtitles with that, so I'm not going to let it go on too long, as I don't expect very many people to speak Russian or Ukrainian. But obviously, the conditions are not all that fantastic. While we've seen a lot of it coming from inside of Russia before they've deployed, we don't see nearly as much of it once they actually get to the country and have actually been on the front lines. The Rasputitsa mud, which literally translates to Sea of Mud, has really started to set in. And we've talked about this before, but more evidence is starting to kick up about it. It's causing both sides to bog down as they attempt to maneuver on the battlefield. And there are heavily armored vehicles becoming stuck on the unimproved roadways or dirt roads, essentially, and making efforts to cross fields even difficult on foot, let alone on vehicles. It makes it completely impossible. And this is an issue for both sides. These environmental conditions are something both sides must overcome. The very same thing that caused Russia to lose any and all momentum at the beginning of the war and bog them down to the point they had to retreat from the north. This is the very same thing that could very much bog down Ukrainian troops as they continue their offensives in the south. We're already starting to see this, especially from several different videos of MRAPs, which are unable to gain traction in these, and unfortunately also have a very high center of balance, meaning that they're very easy to tip over, very top heavy. And we get that once again here, but these heavily armored vehicles, they simply do not have the traction, can't get the traction, and what traction they do get ends up sinking them further and further into the mud. This is a Navistar Max Pro MRAP. And you can see what happens. Trying to get it out of the mud, and it's just drifting around. This is those unimproved roads I was talking about, those dirt roads. They just turn into literally a sea of mud. It makes things impossible to maneuver these forces. And think, this is just one MRAP. Think of the entire armored columns that are being used here. This makes it a very difficult situation because you can't maneuver your enemy. You can't outmaneuver your enemy. And what this ends up doing is it bottlenecks you. It forces you to take main roads like this one that run through these towns and villages. And these things, you need to have to find paved roads in order to maneuver. And those are very well known. Paved roads, what improved roads there are. Entire sections of your intelligence are based off of the types of roads that there are in any given area. And this means that essentially Ukrainian forces, they can't outmaneuver Russian troops until this Rasputitsa is finished. So anytime you're moving large quantities of troops, you're moving vehicles, you're moving equipment, you're moving supplies, the Russians know as equally as much as the Ukrainians exactly what roads they have to take. There is no other cross the field here, throw them off here, get into this wood line. There is none of that because your vehicle will sink, and there is no way that equipment or those troops will end up making it to the battlefield. They will be bogged down in this mud, and you'll have to get recovery vehicles, which you may lose in turn trying to recover them. So it's equally difficult for both sides. It makes it very difficult to maneuver, and therefore we're probably going to see a little bit of slowdown, and we're probably going to see what ends up happening is that Ukraine's probably end up going to be taking a tactical pause and letting for that ground, because here in about a month and a half or so, here late December, early January, this mud is going to stop, and it's going to turn into a very thick It's going to turn into a very hardened permafrost, and that is going to allow them to maneuver once again, at least until we see the same conditions start to set back in. After that very short window for offensive operations, we see those conditions set in once again for March and April and all the way starting into May, which is when we saw the war really kicking off with offensives. So expect this kind of conditions for a long time. This is pretty much what the outstanding segment of the war is going to be for the winter and into next year, and that's really what we're going to be seeing because it's just too difficult. But the Russians are also dealing with the same issues, and while Ukrainians may be having the issues with, or going to have equal issues maneuvering, generally speaking, they are also much better equipped for the winter, so meaning that Russian troops were already starting to see signs and possibly see deaths as a result of hypothermia and cold temperatures, as it's already hitting sub-zero temperatures in Ukraine anyway. Once again, we see World War I in color, and this is what I meant earlier when I said it looks much more like the Somme or Verdun than any other kind of war in history. This is not World War II. This is not Vietnam. This is not the Gulf War or Desert Storm or the war in Iraq or the invasion of Panama. This is not any of that. This is very, very much more like World War I than really any other war you could compare it to. The immense amount of artillery usage is very noticeable from both sides. This is a key distinct feature of the Russian army by its doctrine, which if you really want to, just go look at they actually displayed their doctrine, signed in 2014. They're on their own webpage for the Embassy of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. But doctrinally, the Russians are very heavy with their artillery usage, and you see the effects on the landscape. I mean, the entire areas are just dotted with shell craters. You can see where the artillery line or where the Ukrainian troops are supposed to be as you get closer and closer. But this is an emphasis. This style of bombardment, this is saturation bombardment. This is what the BM-21 Grad system that I keep bringing up is meant to do. Those rocket systems where you just see them launching massive amounts, that you see these tubes on the back of them, they're just launching a massive amount of rockets. Those are the Grads. They fire 40 122 millimeter Katyusha rockets at a time in a salvo. The Katyusha is the exact same one used in the Battle of Stalingrad in the 40s during Operation Barbarossa, and you see that here in the modern form. And this style of bombardment, while this is a field, and it gives you a good picture of what's happening through this wide open field and all these shell craters, this result is the exact same thing happening to towns. This result in this field is exactly what happened to a city block in Mariupol, or in Kharkiv, or in Kupiansk, or in Kramatorsk, or in Bakhmut, or in name a city or town. Take this picture, take every shell crater here, and lay it over a city block in any of those cities, and that is what is happening. It is the same effect, but you see it in a different way when it's a city versus a field. The destruction may appear more or less apparent, but the destruction is no different. The results are no different. It is still an immense amount of destruction on the landscape. And while we see these shell craters, it is guaranteed that this is not all of them. The reality of this war is that there is so much unexploded ordnance in Ukraine that they are going in partial amounts of square miles per day to demine, and they're finding hundreds, if not thousands, of unexploded ordnance in any given time. The Ministry of Internal Affairs reports on this heavily, and this will be something that will affect Ukraine not for decades, but generations. In fact, if you go to France, every single spring as they plow and they till their fields, they have the steel harvest, where they go through and they are cultivating and bringing up all of the ordnance from World War I and World War II. There are places, the Ardennes Forest, where it is so dangerous that not even EOD teams are allowed to enter there, as ordnance from just the First World War is so rampant and so degraded that any of them can go off at any point in time. And Ukraine is essentially being covered in the exact same thing. And this very thick rasputitsa mud means that the way that most explosives work is they have what's called a crush switch on the front of it. Means that as it impacts its target, whether that be the ground, a person, or a building, or a vehicle, it crushes the front end of the projectile, and that ignites the explosive charge. The very thick and soft rasputitsa mud mean that these explosive charges become swallowed as these rockets impact the ground. They become swallowed by the mud, and simply it's so soft that they don't crush the front end of them, at least not enough to set off the explosive, and therefore these things become embedded like nails driven into wood into the ground around them. And so as a result, you have an immense amount of unexploded ordnance littered across Ukraine in all of its towns and cities and villages, and even in its horrendous amounts of fields which have been struck and so damaged by Russian and Ukrainian artillery. And that is the reality. It's the same reality that has been faced across Europe as a result of World War I and World War II. And now we have a fresh glimpse of a war that is much more efficient in its killing power than either of those wars combined, and it's being brought down upon Ukraine in its scale and scope. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't some good things happening. In fact, for those of us that may live in the United States, or if you do celebrate worldwide, a Ukrainian soldier here in the trenches ended up releasing a video giving a very happy Thanksgiving to everybody. And so I figured it was kind of uplifting, and I kind of wanted to share it. And it's in English too, so it's good for, I understand that this is a primarily English-speaking channel. I apologize, I don't speak other languages, but I thought this was good for at least our English-speaking audience. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this.
Dear Americans, today you celebrate Thanksgiving. It is customary on this day to thank each other for help and support. We would like to express gratitude from all of the Ukrainian warriors. We thank you for the support, our struggle for defending with us foundation of democracy, democratic values, and the right to be free. But the bloody war still rages in Ukraine, a war for our independence. At the dawn of the Union, you fought for the right to be free on your soil. And you have become the leader of the free world and will remain the great United States of America until the free world remains truly free. We appreciate your support. God bless America and glory to Ukraine.
I thought it was just a nice little touching video, and it's a much better way to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving, even if it may be belated, than anything that I could ever do. So thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to that young man there on the front lines. Jump up into Dnipro, where ensuring aid does still continue. According to the UN's World Food Program, or WFP, ended up securing a generator for its large packaging site in the city of Dnipro. Reportedly, despite the issues, the World Food Program has said it has reached over 1.7 million people with humanitarian aid this month.
This week, Ukraine experienced the heaviest wave of missile attacks since the beginning of the war, leaving over 10 million people without power and running water. Despite this, the WFP Dnipro area office is hard at work. A generator gave the team enough light to continue packing food kits in the warehouse. We will not stop delivering to Ukrainian communities most in need.
Once again, a very large warehouse, and yeah, that's fantastic. They've reached 1.7 million people. It's a huge amount of outreach for them, and it's great to see that humanitarian aids continue to flow through despite some difficulties that these teams may be facing. Come down here into the Kherson Oblast, where unfortunately we find the dismal realities of Russian occupation. According to Andriy Kostin, who's the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, quote, as of November 24th, Ukrainian law enforcement officers have found 9 torture chambers in the liberated territories of the Kherson region. Russian occupiers illegally held and tortured here Ukrainian citizens. Moreover, 432 dead bodies of Ukrainian civilians killed by Russian aggressors have been found, end quote. And an additional quote coming from the press service of the Ministry of Reintegration and Temporary Occupied Regions stated, quote, as of November 24th, 200 dead bodies of Ukrainian civilians killed by Russian occupiers have been found in liberated territories in the Mykolaiv and Kherson regions, end quote. Unfortunately, that number is expected to rise significantly, as these regions had some of the most well-organized and well-backed partisan movements in the entire section of occupied regions. And so the brutal suppression of the civilian population is to be considered much higher here than just about anywhere else. And so unfortunately that number will likely rise significantly as the days and weeks and months and more than likely years continue. But it doesn't end there, as 10 people were killed and 54 injured as a result of Russian shelling here in the city of Kherson, as well as the surrounding communities. Quote, the Russian occupiers shelled Kherson in the region on November 24th. 10 people were killed, 54 citizens were injured. Local residential buildings and a children's playground were damaged, and that's coming from Yaroslav Yunashevich, the head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration. Coming from the official Twitter of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Elena Halushka, who is a board member at the International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Some results of the shelling which impacted Kherson. Coming from Special Kherson Cat, who has accurately reported a lot of this information. We do actually go through and we vet our sources with already vetted sources to ensure that this stuff is accurate. So believe it or not, Special Kherson Cat's actually pretty accurate as a source, believe it or not. But this is the result of some of the Russian shelling here in Kherson.
Як це відбувалося? Скажіть, будь ласка.
Мы пошли закупить. Прилет. 4 трупа были.
Люди сказали, зараз поїдемо подивимось, там один труп в кінці Комкова лежить біля дороги. Є бабуся, яка в третьому під'їзді лежить мертва. Зараз будинок 15.
Вас зараз в 8-му школу відвозять, ви там ночуєте, вас там зустрічають, вранці ми забезпечимо прийдуть соціальні працівники, і ті, хто буде потребувати евакуації, відповідно будемо організовувати евакуацію. Домовились?
Кондеры висят, то я думаю,
Come down here to the Kiev Independent, which reported on this as well. Also have an official news story coming out from them. And coming from the Ministry from the General Military Administration here in Kherson Oblast, their update as well from their official Telegram channel. And so that is the news coming out of Ukraine tonight. But that doesn't mean that the news ends there. There's plenty of stuff still regarding the war in Ukraine, but there's also plenty of other stuff happening throughout the world as we begin to roll into our international news segment. And we begin, of course, up here in Russia, where here out of Moscow, we have had several of the latest developments. Yelkovsky Passage Shopping Center was currently on fire, as was reported. In the center of Moscow, the Yelkovsky Passage Shopping Center went on fire. People were being evacuated in the burning Yelkovsky Passage Shopping Center. It's reported that there are people being blocked in the building, and the fire can spread to neighboring buildings as well. In a little bit bigger news, the State Duma has decided to take on YouTube. The State Duma of the Russian Federation has decided to take on YouTube, and has decided to take on Google and its subsidiary YouTube to reinstate Duma TV, which was removed by YouTube. Under the Russian court order, YouTube must reinstate the channel Duma TV, or will pay a fine of 100,000 rubles, or $1,673.64. USD per day, with a cap of 1 billion rubles, which is $16,736,401.67 USD. The order even provides a provision in case Google attempts to file bankruptcy, in which the authority is delegated to the Committee on Security and Corruption Control. Google's net worth is estimated for 2022 to be $420 billion USD, or 931,380,128 rubles. I don't think that they'll be filing for bankruptcy. We got that from the official website of the State Duma. President Vladimir Putin ended up meeting with Razvan Kadyrov, his little puppet from Chechnya, and his counterpart and loyal partner. The counter-right fighters have been heavily recruited from the region to fight in the war in Ukraine, and though their assessed battlefield significance appears to be overportrayed, as they mostly play a propaganda role. This is reported according to the Kremlin's official website. They say the discussion was focused on the situation in the region. Vladimir Putin and Razvan Kadyrov also discussed issues related to the work of Chechen units in the special military operation. It's a war, guys. You can just call it that. That's not the only thing coming from the Kremlin. War Gonzo received the Order of Courage. Shit you not. The Russian journalist and propagandist Semyon Pegov, also known as War Gonzo, was awarded the Order of Courage for bravery while acting as a combat correspondent in the front lines of Ukraine. The declaration was signed as an executive order by President Vladimir Putin. Wargonzo was officially reported to have been wounded by a Ukrainian butterfly mine. However, unofficially, it would appear that he shot himself in the foot while operating small arms weapons in the trenches while filming. This is the official Kremlin website reporting this. It says the president signed an executive order awarding journalist and war correspondent Semyon Pegov the Order of Courage for bravery and determination and dedication demonstrated while performing his professional duty. This is the idiot himself. He reported that is a PPSH from World War II. He reportedly shot himself in the foot with that. There's videos of him being loaded into a BTR. Or sorry, a BMP afterwards. And we see yet another Putin deepfake. This is fantastic. So, this is coming from the Russian embassy to the United States' official Twitter. Similar to his appearance earlier in the war, it would appear that President Putin once again attempted to fool his people by stating he met with the mothers of personnel of the war in Ukraine. However, as the internet was very clearly pointed out, something seems off about it. Could it be, in fact, that his head doesn't quite fit in the suit that he's wearing? This is the official photo here, and I don't know if you can tell, but that's very poor editing. So, let's see here. Let's just pull up this image link for you. There we go. Yeah. So his suit ends here at where my cursor is. His head doesn't. Do you know what else is missing? While it wasn't pointed out, he has had, due to recent treatments, he has had a very distinct black mark on his hand, located on the top of his hand above where his watch is. So there you go. Another deepfake discovered. Thank you, Internet, for pointing this one clearly out for us. Yes, there you go. The man, once again, just like when he slapped his hand through his microphone, he is here, and he is, in fact, or he is here once again. Somebody else is sitting here, and his face has been presented over it quite largely. And so large, in fact, it doesn't fit inside of his suit anymore. Now, moving on to more serious topics at large. Up in Estonia, 9 more buses were sent to Ukraine. Estonia sent another 9 buses to help Ukraine to help restore transport links and help Ukrainians in the Zhytomyr Oblast. You can see these being provided there for them. Awesome to see. Norway ended up filing a declaration of intervention under Article 63 of the Statute of the Court of the International Court of Justice. They ended up filing a declaration of intervention with the International Court of Justice regarding Ukraine versus Russia case regarding allegations of genocide. That official statement was reported by the International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice at The Hague here in the Netherlands. Down here and coming out of Prague, heat and light equipments and aggregation units for Ukraine. The Prague is donating equipment to help provide light and heat to Kiev and Mykolaiv, as well as equipment for hospitals, including 626 heaters, 400 for Kiev and 226 for Mykolaiv, 18 aggregation units, 10 for Kiev and 8 for Mykolaiv, and medical equipment worth about $1 million USD for hospitals. Coming from the United Kingdom, the UK's Foreign Secretary ended up visiting Kyiv today. He ended up visiting there and stated that the Secretary ended up announcing that the United Kingdom will send 24 ambulances to Ukraine to replace losses they have sustained throughout the conflict. And coming out of France, 100 more generators will be going to Ukraine as well. The Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs began delivering 100 generators to Romania on November 23rd, each with a power of 50 to 100 kilowatts. The generators are being handed over to the Ukrainian authorities. Coming from the French government here. Once again, coming from the French government, their official French their French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if you would like to see their official announcement, we have that as well. Jumping down into Malta, Norway was the only one. Malta also filed a declaration of intervention under Article 63 to the International Court of Justice under the same grounds. And that begins to lead us here and into the country of Syria. Coming out of Damascus, the capital of the country of Syria, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad received a delegation by another Russian ally, Belarus. The delegation, led by Belarusian Prime Minister Roman Golovchenko, spoke regarding geopolitics, sharing their anti-Western ideologies. It was stated that, quote, Golovchenko pointed out that the Western campaign that his country was subjected to aimed at deteriorating living conditions and stopping economic facilities, in addition to media propaganda to influence people, expressing his appreciation for Damascus for standing by Minsk, stressing that the battle the two countries are fighting is one battle, according to the official Twitter of the Office of the President of Syria. And this is coming from the Syrian presidency's official Twitter. There's a nice long thread here. Each of these actually can be translated if you do not read Arabic, as I don't read Arabic, and I did try. Delta Aviation says, did you cover Belgorod? Out of all the sources I looked at today, and I spent a lot of extra time today looking at sources, I did not see anything big out of Belgorod. But here comes to the point of the personal input that I was talking about when I started the stream today. And that is because this is very close to me. This is very close to me, and this is something that I understand at a personal level. And this is something that I have very personal attachment to. And that is that the United States Central Command ended up confirming today that Firebase Shadadi was attacked with 2 missiles of unknown origin. Coming out today, rockets attacked near al-Shadadi, Syria. Coming from United States Central Command, 2 rockets targeted coalition forces in the U.S. patrol base in al-Shadadi, Syria, today at approximately 10:31 p.m. local time, or 4:31 p.m. EST. The attack resulted in no injuries or damage to the base or coalition property. Syrian Democratic Forces visited the rocket origin site and found a 3rd unfired rocket. Quote, attacks of this kind place coalition forces and the civilian population at risk and undermine the hard-earned stability and security of Syria and the region, according to Colonel Joe Buccino, CENTCOM spokesman. So, why is this important? Well, luckily, even Google allows me to show you this. This is Firebase al-Shadadi. So Firebase al-Shadadi was set up in 2016 following the battle for Shadadi by the SDF. It is now pretty much the hub of the U.S. service forces as well as coalition forces in the country. You can see here just how large it is. This is called the Annex, for those that don't know. This was actually, so the Annex in its entirety actually only came out to about here initially, where we did a lot of shooting and ranges. But the Annex was greatly expanded to encompass the amount of munitions that were being brought in. You can see here the HIMARS emplacements that were being used at these locations. This is also where the attack helicopters, and so you can see the attack helicopters here. You can see the outlines of the Apaches. These are AH-64 Apache helicopters. And these right here, these are actually UH-60 Blackhawk helicopters that are for what's called dust-off, or the medical evacuation helicopters. You can see this is where all of the trucks and everything come in for additional supplies, because supplies are trucked in. This is HLZ, and so you can see where several of the posts and stuff are. You know, see where the Osprey crash happened over here. But this is Firebase al-Shadadi. This is where coalition forces are. I'm not going to point out any of the tactical stuff there. any more of the tactical stuff like operations centers and stuff. But that is Firebase Ashadati. But you can see where it's at. This is the courtyard whenever, so you can see here, this is an ISIS prison that's here on the end. And you can see this giant open courtyard, and this is actually where kids come out and they play soccer and stuff, or football if you're from one of those countries. The kids will come out about 8:30, 9 o'clock every single morning, and they come out and they start playing football out there in this area. And a lot of this is taken up by Pure Loyalist. Says it covers a pretty massive area. You say that, but it really doesn't. The actual living part of the base, if I measure this here, only covers about a square, or it covers about a mile across. It's only really about, a square mile-ish. It's not very big. You feel trapped. You feel like a rat in a cage by the end of a deployment. But it's not really that big. It really isn't. It was even smaller when I was there because those expansions hadn't been finished yet. But there's a large civilian population here, a huge civilian population, and the SDF are living with you and everything while you're here. There's a lot of SDF in here. There's a lot of SDF in here. SDF have posts here as well as we do. This over here is SDF. At least last I remembered. The hospital over here, or the former school over here, that was vacated. That got turned into an SDF command post. There's a ton of SDF everywhere. But so this is a really important facility. It includes not just the aircraft there, but also includes the main field surgical team, or the FST, for Syria. This is where these people are like neurosurgeons and everything else. Like, these people are like, they can do some insane things. I've seen them in action. I thought that some of this stuff wasn't survivable in the best of conditions. I've seen them bring people back from conditions that are just insane to think about in the field with really minimal equipment. They're exceptionally good at their job, and I cannot possibly begin to describe how good they are. The best doctors I've ever seen in the world. Hands down, best doctors I've ever seen in the world. It also includes the Tactical Operations Center, or the TOC, which is where all the main operations for Syria they go through. So any of the main coordination between the SDF and everything, it happens here. This is Firebase Shadati. FBS is what it's known. Also known as Firebase Shithole. That is just where we're at. But that is this location. I actually brought up some. So that is KLZ from the ground, or HLZ from the ground. So that is this section right here. That is this. And then what else do we have here? Nope, that's the photo I just showed. That is one of the streets over here. That's actually during a sandstorm that happened. That would be this street right here. That'd be down here in this section. That's during a sandstorm. This is all from 2017, 2018. You see here, this is from one of the posts. And you can see the overlook of the city there, of Ashadati, and over the fire base on that sector. And that would be looking out from here. That'd be looking out from here, and it looks like they removed that post. But it would be looking out from here, and that would be, you can see this wire that runs along this side, and you can see the rooftops and everything of this sector of the city. And then finally, this is off of the other sector of that post, and that runs down the main line, or the main entryway, which runs right down this road right here, where you can see all those barricades. You can see where that gate is, and that runs all the way up to the main gate up there. And you can see those different gates and roads up there. And that's actually where SDF housing and everything is. This is specifically the YPJ, or the females. But that kind of gives you an up close and personal like look at Firebase Shadati and where this is happening, so you can kind of hopefully that gives you a little bit of a better idea. Because I know a lot of these places we don't get an on the ground look except from the official sources, but I know I spent a lot of time here. I spent 4.5 months really here. This is mainly where I was out of. This is where I ate, slept, worked out like 8 times a day at the gym. Walked my way to posts whenever the Toyota Hilux was down. That building right there that I was showing you. This is where I got my YPG patch from when I was sitting there on the tailgate of a Hilux talking with an SDF guy, even though we didn't even speak the same language, and he was just really chill. We sat there and smoked and talked and drank chai tea, and the guy on top of the roof, there's an older gentleman. He had a flock of pigeons that he built a coop up there, and he would come up there and he'd bring us warm, freshly brewed chai tea and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, and to see that it gets attacked again. Now, we took fire when I was there, but it was small arms, it was sporadic, it was guys taking pot shots at us. It very rarely was it any kind of accuracy. No Google Street View. That is correct. There is no Google Street View here. But anyway, the guys, they would take pot shots at us. They would, they every once in a while you get some accurate engagement. But nothing like this. But to see Shadati be attacked with actual rockets and to actually be engaged, on a level that is quite that large, using rocket attacks and everything is really concerning. So it means that because the SDF have really prevented that. He asks what river is that? It is the Nar al-Kubar River. But if you go to this flows all the way southward, and it flows down this main stretch of road, the 7, and it runs down here and into the Euphrates. This area is specifically called, once you get down towards Sawar, this area is called the Middle Euphrates River Valley. There's also additional reports coming in, but unverified, that the Conoco gas plant was also struck. The Conoco gas plant is over here near the city of Kasham, which is down here along the Merv. This is also one of the largest military facilities here in all of Syria for the U.S. and coalition forces. There's reports that it has been attacked as well as the surrounding areas. I was unable to verify that happening. Also, wouldn't be the first time. This right here is where the Battle of Kasham took place. So this is where that battle took place between U.S. forces and the Russian mercenary Wagner group. It is right here. And I did not bring my phone with me when that happened, so I hate to break it to you, but I don't have any photos of that incident. Not that I would probably be sharing them. I think they're old enough and so much has changed from my understanding that I think they're safe to share at this point. They don't share anything too disclosing, but yeah. So that's my personal input on this. It's very frustrating. It's very heartbreaking to hear that's happening. And it is a huge amount of civilians there. A lot of kids, a lot of women, a lot of children, a lot of elderly people that are there. And they are relatively at peace. They are relatively don't have to worry about the war, really. They don't have to worry about the Islamic State. There really isn't that much that happens in Shadati itself, aside from the occasional pot shots at somebody. The war, the SDF presence there and the U.S. presence there has pretty much cleared out any Islamic State fighters that there really could possibly be there. And all the IEDs have been cleared so that way they can go out and civilians can just live normal lives. And it's really concerning when that changes. But yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. As someone who spent a lot of time there. Made a lot of friends. So that's my personal input regarding Ashdodi. And I hope that you guys have a better idea of what's happening there too now. And what it's like. At least what it looks like. Come up here, and this is in the border area between Azerbaijan and Armenia, where fighting is currently ongoing, or was ongoing. Tense situation between neighboring countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, continue to flare up, and the Armenian Ministry of Defense reported that the troops were engaged by Azerbaijani forces along the border zone. According to the Azerbaijani government, the Armenian troops began to fire Azerbaijani troops from positions in the border region near its Tisu. Both sides continue to blame each other for increasing military tensions and flare-ups in the conflict. Coming from the Armenian Ministry of Defense's official Twitter. This one is coming from the Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense and their official Twitter, and that also has their official report regarding this. Coming down here and into the border region, this is into northwestern Iran and northeastern Iraq. Iran has deployed forces to its border. Iran deployed forces, the IRGC, to the northwestern border of Iraq near Iraqi Kurdistan. Currently stated as having done so to prevent terrorist crossings, Iran could be looking at making a ground invasion into the region against Kurdish forces, as that is both Iranian and Iraqi Kurdistan. We do have film footage coming out of the movement of troops and equipment into that region. And it would appear yes. Fantastic. So, you may see something kind of interesting coming out of this. This is a very interesting tank. So what they're deploying here, it would appear to be fantastic. You can get a really good look here. Well, and I say a really good look. It's very difficult to get a good look, but you can see here. This appears to be the Zulfikar. So, for those that don't know, Iran built a tank, and they built a very interesting tank. Now, this tank is called the Zulfikar, or the Zulfikar 3 specifically. And the way that it works is it's an Iranian-built tank, specifically built to look like an Abrams. It has the same kind of suspension system. It's meant to throw troops off. So that is what the Zulfikar looks like when it's not covered up. Now, it's kind of the cross. The newer ones look a little bit better than that one does. If you look at the front ends of these, the side skirts look more Russian. That's probably because they're using interim parts there. But the whole point of it is it's supposed to replicate the look of an Abrams tank while still being Soviet-based. And the reason why is misidentification. The Iraqi army actually ends up using import versions of the M1 Abrams. And obviously the United States, who is the country most likely to go to war with Iran, besides Saudi Arabia, also uses the M1 Abrams tanks. And I believe Saudi Arabia does too. But now I'm not pulling the book back out to tell you. Zulfikar 3 is similar in capability to that of the T-72, but it's meant for misidentification, giving an extra second, because first round engagements are... because first round engagements with a tank are usually whoever wins. So whoever fires first usually wins the outside of a tank engagement. Down with Iran, go USMNT on Tuesday, win in advance. Yeah. Come down here. This is in the Balochistan region of Iran, where the protests do continue. And now that Balochistan, Iran is brutally suppressing anti-government protests, stating that protesters in Zahedan and Kosh were Islamic State militants. The IRGC authorized the usage of live ammunition against them. Here are the videos we have coming out.
ملتهم جات السكة
So that's the situation coming out of Zahedan and Kosh down here in the Balochistan region of Iran as government protests do continue. Jumping over into Pakistan, where the International Federation of the Red Cross Red Crescent continues to provide aid. The International Federation of the Red Crescent continues to provide humanitarian aid and medical aid to those affected by the flooding, which ravaged Pakistan. In total, 14 mobile health units of the IFRC have provided aid to more than 70,000 people. This was reported on the IFRC's official Twitter for Asia Pacific. Now, you may be wondering, who is the International Federation of the Red Cross? So there's actually multiple Red Crosses. Every country has their own Red Cross. That's why you have the Ukrainian Red Cross. But you also have that is a government thing. You also have the International Committee of the Red Cross. That is an international organization, or the ICRCs, the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. And then you have the International Federation of the Red Cross, or the IFRC, and that is a private nonprofit organization. So they are different. They are not the same thing. They collaborate with each other, but they are not the same groups. The IFRC is different from the ICRC. So just keep that in mind whenever you are looking at this stuff. The International Federation of the Red Cross is a private non-governmental organization. The International Committee of the Red Cross is an internationally funded organization for humanitarian groups, or for humanitarian work. They are not the same thing. I know that can be a little bit hard to understand, but I had to learn the difference myself. This is up here, and this is where we see some very terrible things happening, and we continue to see very terrible things happening out of China, especially against the Uyghur people. And 44 Uyghurs ended up dying in a fire. This is very frustrating. So a fire broke out in a high-rise residential apartment building in Tianshan district of Urumqi, Xinjiang, at November 24th, 1930 local time, or 7:30 local time. Residents were heard screaming for help to open their door, as the unit doors for the whole building were locked from the outside to prevent them from going out under the zero COVID policy. Other residents couldn't reach out as they too were locked at home. Group text message revealed the last words of the victim on the a victim is on the 16th floor saying, "We are oxygen deprived, our kids are dying too." The fire truck was reportedly stuck at a lockdown barricades for 3 hours before reaching the building.
喷不上呀，他是不是都没有意识到他没有喷上呢？他刚才还是不行，又往里开了一点儿。我说刚才他还是喷的不是很准确，很精准，他又把车往里开了一点儿，再喷一次。他这回可以了，好像还差一点儿，还在担架上，但是火势比刚才好多了。还是没喷上，它喷歪了，我感觉。啊，可以。啊，现在才碰到火源。
So that is the look of the building itself. So here's the group texts that were coming through.
16楼，我们现在已经很缺氧，我们小孩也不行了，快，我们现在太缺氧了。
Ko'chib yaxshi sizlar hozir o'rigi baldinglarni hammasini yo'l gibi suv bilan namlab, bo'lganiga shu ishni orliqqa qo'yib, bugungi bunlarga stot tuaraq turib, hasha o'taga turinglar saqlab.
求求你们了。
You can see what happened to the apartment block. Once again, they were trapped inside based on a zero COVID policy. So that's one of the family of the Uyghurs who ended up dying there. And passed away as well. The youngest who died was a 3-year-old. Officials stated that 10 died, but hospital providers reportedly received 44 bodies. All were reportedly Uyghurs. Videos of the fire truck stuck on the street and unit doors being bounded by strong wires sparked outrage. Massive protests broke out across different neighborhoods of Urumqi on November 25th, calling for accountability and asking the government to end lockdown. It was reported that protesters in Midongkyu, Urumqi, were shot by law enforcement. Local officials denied having locked the doors of residents using wires and stated that all the videos on the internet were malicious splicing. The Chinese government has since announced that any individuals who share news about the incident beyond the governmental narrative would face a penalty. Here's some of the protests.
警察为人民，哪里在为人民，在镇压人民？你们是谁的孩子？这又是谁的爸爸？你们良心不疼吗？今天死了多少人？你们良心不疼吗？你们良心？我们怎么办？人民警察。
我告诉大家了，我是市委副书记，我姓马。
你叫什么名字？我们大家想认识一下。
好吧，
马志军是吧？
马志军啊，对，就是。什么时候能解封？啊，什么时候能解封？解不解封？没有意思。
还有10几天，什么意思？哎，我习惯5天就好了，封40天，40多天。
The list goes on and on and on and on. Keep in mind, they are Uyghur, and it comes as no surprise either. Uyghurs are prosecuted. They literally have concentration camps, or as China likes to call them, re-education camps of the Uyghur people. They are committing genocide against them here inside of China. We continue down here in the Taiwan Strait, where once again we see more Chinese incursions into the protection zone of Taiwan. More Chinese incursions continuing in Taiwanese security zones. Today, 4 military vessels and 6 aircraft once again entered Chinese protective zone. This was once again reported by the Ministry of National Defense of the Republic of China, also known as Taiwan. This is essentially a daily occurrence. Down here in Singapore, Singapore will be donating $100,000 or donated $100,000 USD to disaster relief. The government of Singapore donated $100,000 USD to the Singapore Red Cross, the SRC, which is providing disaster relief efforts for West Java, Indonesia, in response to the massive earthquake, releasing a statement yesterday regarding the donation. We do see that coming from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore in their official statement as well. But coming out of West Java, we see more assistance being carried out regarding the earthquake. International community is rallying emergency disaster aid for Indonesia after a devastating earthquake struck West Java. The situation on the ground remains unclear, but the casualty numbers continue to climb as assessments continue. Reportedly, one report I saw today said that so far, despite the fact that many areas have yet to be surveyed, the death toll for children alone has surpassed over 100. We'll see some of those disaster aid centers here in West Java. Once again, coming from IFRC, or the International Federation of the Red Cross, Asia Pacific. Jumping over and into Africa. We come over here, we're into Somalia, where 40 security personnel were killed. According to the Al-Qaeda affiliated terrorist group Al-Shabaab, militants attacked security forces in the city of Keb and the Galgaduud province, seizing 2 garrisons and killing 40 security personnel and taking weapons and equipment that they seized and the city entirely. This comes as the Somali Air Force was conducting strikes in the lower Shabelle, killing 15 Al-Shabaab militants. You can see this is coming from the official statement from Al-Shabaab. You can see some of the results of the attack. Meanwhile, up in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, the UN World Food Program, as well as the World Health Organization, has so far announced that it delivered over 2,400 metric tons of aid to Tigray, but pleads with the authorities on the ground to open up access to currently inaccessible regions and meet the agreements that they made in their own peace treaties. Coming from the World Food Program. They have delivered enough food to feed around 170,000 people and other life-saving supplies. More than 13 million people in northern Ethiopia need assistance. In Tigray alone, 90% of people require food assistance. The first flights of humanitarian cargo in Tigray have started, but access in all parts of the region is needed. The World Food Program aims to reach 11 million people across Ethiopia, but requires $422 million USD to meet those urgent needs. It's also nice to see that Pedo Putin is once again trending. And coming from the World Health Organization in Ethiopia, 70 metric tons urgently needed medicines and emergency supplies were dispatched to Tigray and arrived today in Mekelle and will soon arrive in Shire. Down here and on the border with the country of Rwanda, here in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Bukavu, we see that peacekeeping teams here in South Kivu for the United Nations continue to work tirelessly to stabilize the DRC, which remains fragile after years of wars, rebellions, and general political instability. Now terrorist organizations have added to that list of concern as Africa falls victim to the Islamic State and its affiliates. But the UN team here was busy destroying explosives as they work tirelessly to try and make the region safer. You can see the team there, which have been put together. There was also observed by the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who oversaw the destruction and verified it for them. We jump up here, and this is from Malam Fatori, where fresh images were released from Malam Fatori here in Nigeria of the attack, which took place on the 22nd. That additional imagery has finally come across for us to see kind of what happened. And we can see this is coming from the Islamic State, of course, always willing to film their activities. A very bold militant group. You can see them as they attack these military garrisons. And just the amount of equipment that they had seized. It was a pretty sizable amount of machine guns and ammunition and other equipment. Unfortunately, the Islamic State is extremely powerful in Africa, and Africa, as was declared in Morocco early this year, is now the leading area for the fight against fundamental extremist Islamic terrorism, especially the Islamic State, JNIM, Boko Haram, and, of course, Al-Shabaab. Jumping over the Atlantic and over into Port-au-Prince, Haiti, we see a cholera outbreak in Haiti's prisons. Poor sanitary conditions have led to a fast-paced cholera outbreak in the Haitian prisons of Port-au-Prince. Conditions in Haiti, created by unrest and extreme gang violence, have led to horrendous sanitary and environmental conditions. This makes a densely populated capital and much of the country high risk for fast-paced spread of diseases. As was reported by the committee of the International Committee of the Red Cross for Panama and the Caribbean, these prisons are facing a spread of cholera, which has been exacerbated due to the recent crisis in Port-au-Prince. We are working with partners to provide emergency health care for detainees, working to prevent the spread of cholera in 18 detention centers. They followed on this with a cholera update stating that our response has begun, and in the coming days we will help the central prison in Port-au-Prince increase access to safe water and reinforce hygiene standards to contain the contagion of the epidemic. Jumping up and into the United States, we have a couple of different developments, two of which are coming from the United Nations headquarters here in New York City. And yesterday began 16 days of activism. This will end on December the 10th, but it will continue permanently, of course, as it always should, 365 days a year. Yesterday, I should say, but today for us begins the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Recognized by the United Nations, the movement is driven to end gender-based violence, which is prolific throughout the world's conflicts, and also promote gender equality. We see from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who stated that as we begin 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, I call on everyone to get involved. From amplifying the voices of survivors and activists to supporting women's organizations, we can all act and protect women's rights. The UN Youth Envoy, newly created division of the United Nations, also stated this, addressing the elephant in the room. UN Women, of course, mentioning this. There's a short video coming from UN Women regarding the movement.
In the quest for gender equality, it feels as though every step forward is followed by 2 steps back. In the grip of war, global pandemics, and climate change, the world has not become safer for women and girls. And the hard-won progress made by women's rights movements around the world faces a reversal, a pushback. Increasing assaults on women's right to make decisions about their own bodies, mounting obstacles to girls' education and leadership, rising cases of disappearances and of women being killed just for being women. Violence against women and girls, online or offline, cannot and will not go unchecked. Now's our moment to add momentum to the growing movement against violence, oppression and repression. Against the pushback, we push forward. By using our votes to elevate more women at every level into positions of power, by enshrining the right to freedom of choice and education, by protecting disempowered communities and advocating for survivors' rights, and by taking action to end all violence against women and girls. The only way forward is forward.
see some people signing off for the night. It's good to see a lot of people coming on and supporting the channel. I really thank you guys a lot. It's been a lot of it's been a long time working. You know, we've done this for a long time now, and I appreciate it. But as you watch the news and as you become informed, I want to remind everyone that the point of this is to not just inform you on the world happening, but to take action too. Please be sure to check out the video description before you leave off and see if you can't, you know, if you can't donate to one of those organizations down there, that's fine. If you can't give a lot, give a little. But if you can't give anything at all, help us grow this thing, grow this project. The more impact we have, the greater good we'll be able to do and to help even more people in these situations. So thank you very much, everybody that's been supporting the channel. It's been fantastic to see a bunch of new people come in tonight, pure loyalists. Also had I screwed up her name too, but I saw several other individuals, Margaret Goff for instance, coming in. So great to see everyone here, and I hope that if you guys are signing off early, I understand it's late in many parts of the world, that you'll be back. As we continue here, Ursula von der Leyen also chiming in on this. Ursula von der Leyen is the it oversees the European Union. And the color for the activist movement is orange. If you want to participate, wear orange from now until December the 10th. That is part of the participation here. Coming from Human Rights Watch. So there you guys go on that as well. And they brought up a good statement, and that is Mahsa Amini. Mahsa Jina Amini, who was beaten by the morality police of Iran's regime there in Tehran, beaten to death for not wearing the hijab properly under Iran's Sharia law. And as that rolls us into our next talking point from the United Nations headquarters, the United Nations is setting up an investigative team to begin working on the situation in Iran. The UN investigative team, similar to that created to document human rights abuses in Ukraine, has been created in order to investigate and document human rights abuses amid the Iranian protests, which began on 16 September. Russia immediately responded to the authorization, stating that the U.S. was once again interfering in Iran's domestic affairs and stating that the authors should focus on resolving their own human rights issues. Coming from the United Nations Human Rights Council's official Twitter, the vote in favor of creating this is the 35th special session of the UN Human Rights Council, delegating a new fact-finding mission to investigate alleged human rights violations in Iran. Coming from the UN in Geneva. This is coming from Volker Turk, who is the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations.
It pains me to see what is happening in the country. The images of children killed, of women beaten in the streets, of people sentenced to death. We have seen waves of protests over the past years, calling for justice, equality, dignity, and respect for human rights. They have been met with violence and repression. The unnecessary and disproportionate use of force must come to an end. The old methods and the fortress mentality of those who wield power simply don't work. In fact, they only aggravate the situation. We are now in a full-fledged human rights crisis.
Once again, coming from Volker Turk, who is the High Commissioner of Human Rights for the United Nations on the situation in Iran. The International Committee of the Red Cross also stated on this regarding the start of today's 16 days of action. Sexual violence is never the survivor's fault. And coming from the... This is coming from the Russian mission to Geneva.
Господин председатель, отмечаем контрпродуктивность нынешней спецсессии. Такие инициативы не имеют ничего общего с заботой о правах человека. Их цель – навешивание ярлыков и оказание давления на неугодные государства под правозащитными предлогами. Упорно игнорируется то, что Иран предоставляет подробную информацию о мерах по поощрению и защите прав человека и выполнении международных обязательств в этой сфере. Только за последние месяцы иранские коллеги распространили порядка 20 соответствующих докладов. Однако это мало волнует инициаторов спецсессии. Главной их задачей является принятие еще одной политизированной резолюции ради раскачивания внутриполитической ситуации в Иране. Идея учреждения миссии по установлению фактов без согласия на то иранских властей по своей сути нелегитимна. Задача СПЧ и его механизмов заключается в оказании государством содействия, а не в проведении расследований. Призываем прекратить вмешиваться во внутренние дела Ирана и дестабилизировать ситуацию в этой стране. Авторам инициативы лучше было бы сфокусировать внимание на решении их собственных проблем в правозащитной сфере, коих более чем достаточно.
Yep. Well, I guess when you're providing the majority of the Russian war effort right now, you probably get their backing, don't you? Yeah, so who's Russia's friends again? Belarus, Iran, China, who's distancing themselves, North Korea, Venezuela, even Afghanistan. Even the Taliban told them to calm down. Yep, that's Russia's friends. Oh, and Syria, which is literally the only reason Bashar al-Assad has a country is because of Russia. So yeah, Russia immediately came to the aid of Iran after they said that they were going to start investigating them. But that drops us down here into Washington, D.C., where 80 power generators will be provided to Ukraine. The U.S. ambassador to Ukraine reported on November 25th that the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, is providing Ukraine with 80 additional generators. And I'm sure that they will immediately be put into good use. Finally, we can roll into and wrap up the night with some good or interesting topics. We go out of our way to find these things just to ensure that we can end the night on kind of a good note. A lot of this is kind of dark and depressing, and we want to see, some good things about the world. We want to see happy or interesting things or advancements being made. And the first thing we start with is actually coming from NASA. We'll start here at the Kennedy Flight Center, where NASA is partnering with the European Space Agency, or the ESA, and is planning to return samples taken by rovers on Mars back to Earth for study. NASA and the ESA are working in conjunction together with Artemis, Maven mission, and many future missions to take humanity not just to the lunar surface, but also to the Martian one as well. And there's a video released by NASA regarding their plan to bring back samples from the Martian planet, which would be the first time we've ever really done so. Take a look. pretty awesome. I mean, that would be pretty cool. I mean, yeah, it seems like ultra complicated and it's really cool, like kind of visuals that they put with it. But it's really cool that is like what they're planning on doing. Like that is what they're going to be doing, and it's pretty awesome to see how much work is now going into really getting us off of the planet. Humanity hasn't really left the planet since the 60s when we went and we stepped on the moon, and then we came back. Then we did it a couple more times, and then we just never decided to do it again until now with the Artemis 1 missions. Artemis 1, which is what our next update is. So Artemis 1, the whole point of the Artemis series is you start with Artemis 1. Artemis 1 test the SLS rocket system, the new rocket system built by the United States. And also the different parts provided by Europe and also the Orion spacecraft to ensure that everything checks out, to make sure it all works before we put people into it. Then Artemis 2, we basically practice. It's a rehearsal. They do a crewed flyby of the moon. Artemis 3, we land on the moon. Artemis 4 and 5 and what have you. After that, the Artemis series, what they plan on doing is a little bit murky, but right now they're developing, and I've seen videos of it so far, of the inflatable habitats and everything. We're going to be making a lunar base. And making a lunar base allows us to test things and build things and test them in space in real time to see how they work, how well they do, and allows for a lot of things. And also, the moon's gravity is a lot less than Earth's. So once you get to the moon, it takes a lot less fuel, and it takes to get you off of the lunar surface and back into orbit and on your way to Mars. So it sets you up for the Mars missions, which is what we're kind of looking toward to at this point. Is the Artemis missions are actually the first step towards Mars. And one of the things you have to do is you have to study the surface. You have to pick out a place to land and colonize and all this stuff. And so the soil samples are going to allow for, it's part of that research that allows for the development of these kind of things to find out, to find out more about Mars itself. Was there ever life there? That kind of stuff. But also to allow for the composition of that, to allow for all these soil samples taken from all over the planet to be able to tell, where's a good place to land, what kind of resources are there for the usage, that kind of thing. So it'd be very exciting. And speaking of the Artemis missions and the Orion spacecraft, Orion, which is now what is in orbit right now of the Artemis mission, is now entered into its trajectory orbit, meaning that the Artemis 1 mission is coming into its final phases as Artemis 1 gets ready to return home. In layman's terms, so it's entered into its final retrograde orbit, meaning this is the orbit which will bring it back to Earth. The mission is now entering its final phases. Now it would seem that all the systems on board the aircraft have officially, or spacecraft rather, have officially stated that it is been successful and that it all works. Finally, to end off our night here, we jump over here and on to Hawaii, where we go to one of the observatories here. Ancient galaxies. Astronomers traced 84 bright radiation blasts called short gamma ray bursts, or SGRBs, to colliding stars in ancient galaxies. Astronomers examined the SGRBs and pinpointed them to galactic source of origin. The team found 85% of the short gamma ray bursts they've studied originated in young galaxies that are actively forming stars. So that gamma ray burst that they're looking at, so that's basically an ancient galaxy. So it's 10 billion light years away. That's what they said. To give you an idea, what that means is that this happened, and it's so old. It's 10 billion years old. To give you an idea, Earth itself, if I'm not mistaken, is about 4 billion years old. So all of so all of the light that you just witnessed happened 6 billion years before our planet even existed. Which is pretty wild to think about. And so that gamma ray burst, likewise, happens equally. Yeah. So, yes, very old. Yes. Ancient. When they say ancient, not ancient like ancient Greece, which we think is old. No. To give you an idea, the span of human existence is so incrementally old, it's insane, and you barely have... You can barely... If you were to think... Your lifetime is faster than a fraction of a second in reality of time and space. It is really, really not anything. You are, and despite how historically significant humanity is, we've only been around anatomically for about 200,000 years, roughly ish, about 200,000 years. We weren't the only humans that were around at the time either. There were Homo erectus, which lasted about 10 times longer than we have, also on the planet. And that his lifespan, his entire existence, his millions of years of his existence was a fraction of a second in time and space. So if you ever wanted to feel incrementally small, there you go. But with that, it's kind of cool, though, that they traced it to an ancient galaxy that old. That's pretty wild. And it's so far, they didn't even know it was a galaxy. I understood that there was something there, but they didn't even recognize that it was a galaxy until recently, which is pretty wild. But with that, that is the entirety of the news, at least from our sources for the night. There's been a ton of stuff that we have covered. I hope that you have found it informative and easy to follow. I hope that anyone who has asked questions, that I was able to answer them to the best of my ability, and that they were thorough and informative as well. And I hope that you guys might not have enjoyed, but, just at least got the gist and are better knowledgeable about the world and what's happening around you. And with that, I hope that you guys have a fantastic night. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your weekend. I was not able to celebrate Thanksgiving on yesterday, unfortunately. We had some stuff come up with my family, and so I will be celebrating it tomorrow with my family. And so as a result, I will not be streaming tomorrow, and so we will be covering the last 72 hours of news on Monday morning on Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central that evening for you guys on everything. In the meantime, I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. And I hope that you guys have a good, amazing rest of your weekend. Get a lot of rest and get to relax and do things that you enjoy and spend time with family and friends. And so in the meantime, please be sure to check out the video description below and check out all the different organizations we have down there. And please give your support to them. And please give, if you can't give a lot to them, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Help us grow this channel. The more people that are here, the more people that can expand our impact, the more awesome things we'll be able to do, and the more help we'll be able to give people affected by these news stories. We want to be able to grow to the point that we can put a fundraiser directly on every single stream that we do, and that's only capable through you guys. So give us that like, give us that subscribe, share us in your communities on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter and chat with me and join our Discord. If you have more organizations too, please shoot them to me. Give me a link. Tell me what they do. I want to go through and I want to add more. I want to cover every inch of this globe with reputable, good purpose organizations. That the majority of their stuff goes to their programs and actually helps people. But I see a lot of people wishing me happy Thanksgiving with my family. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And yeah, we're never monetizing this. We're never doing super chats. We're never anything. 100%. This project will always be for charity. We never want to make a single cent off of this. We want it all to go to help people. So thank you very much for allowing us to do this, for continuing your unwavering support through this endeavor and my rants. And I hope that you guys once again have an amazing weekend. And with that, we will once again be streaming, as a reminder, on Monday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, to cover the next 72 hours worth of news. In the meantime, my name is Paul from the New News, and everybody have a fantastic weekend and a great start to your week. Bye now.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бочок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 000 лет. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your double and shove it up your wrinkled butt. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.